For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Or welcome, if it's your first time. Oh boy, this is not centered. What? Apparently I was blind when I was making this board. I am your host, Jade Black. And today I'm talking about why the moment matters. I haven't found a better way of phrasing this yet. The title of the video will probably be different. So this is a drafting episode. This is about the craft of drafting. Because this is something I see a lot on social media that really bothers me is writers putting in brackets, insert action sequence here. There are lots of things people put in brackets and say insert here, and I'm sure there's a time and a place for that, and different processes work for different people. I'm not going to hate on that. But action sequences in particular have really bothered me, especially since writing Shadow on the Snow. Because this is how to make sure your action scenes have no stakes. It's something that's an increasing bit of criticism you see in film. And I have a feeling that this is where it comes from, because it's just, oh no, we need an action sequence here, but we've already written the rest of the script, so it can't really change anything. And I feel like this is the way you end up at that. Maybe this is more of a pantser problem than a plotter problem, but it got me thinking, because this annoys me so much when I see it. It got me thinking about other things where that could be a problem, and why I staunchly don't do this. Because you see a lot of people saying, oh, this is okay, this is fine, and again, if you find that works for you, you find that works for you. I'm not going to hate on you for that. But if you're finding that it doesn't, maybe you're like me. Because the main thing that I want to get out of drafting, one of the reasons that I love drafting so much, is being immersed in the draft, in the story. And there are two particular things that come from that you can't really replicate unless you're immersed, and really immersed. Internal narration is something that I really noticed in editing Black Executioner, in the sense, and this is a bit of a bizarre comment, but there was a bit too much of it. And I know, again, for my particular writing style, it's a bit of a bizarre comment. The reason I make it is because there were a few exchanges, and it really is a few, where things were just not very clear. They were less clear than they should have been, because there was too much internal narration. It was a bit too much. It's very easy to take that out, but while I was editing it, I was thinking, well, thank goodness I do have this, because if I didn't and I wanted to add more in, that would be a much harder job. No, that was one of the things I really noticed in Black Executioner, and it wouldn't surprise me if when I get to Dead Pensament that I have the exact opposite problem, and it's much harder to fix. But it's one of those things that happens very naturally in the first draft if you're immersed in it. You just get that internal narration, it's all there. Maybe this is a first-person writer thing. If you're a third-person writer, maybe this doesn't come so easily in the first draft, I don't know. I've only written third-person a couple of times, but I have to admit that's not something I've had that much struggle with thus far. Again, maybe that's because this is where I'm coming from. The other project to talk about here is actually Charcoal Rain and depth of emotion. Because capturing how a character feels in detail in the moment can be quite difficult, and Charcoal Rain was especially difficult on this one because I had these characters that were, for me, quite unusual and tended not to react to things in ways that I was used to or expecting. So the emotions that come with that are a little bit outside of my comfort zone on that, I guess. And again, if I was coming to that in edits, if it wasn't there, I'd end up with something very different and something that's not properly accurate to the character. And actually, I'd add Shadow on the Snow into this category as well. As of recording this, I am in the editing trenches for Shadow on the Snow. And one of the scenes I edited yesterday, the main issue I took with it was I didn't like the way it was written, because it gave the wrong impression of what was happening with how I'd written it. But the core emotion, the core feeling was there. So it didn't become a matter of, okay, well, I need to, reconstruct exactly what I want out of this scene. It came in the, how do I harness this emotion in a much more raw state, in a way, just bring out the emotion more. It's already there. Bring out tiny little extra details, make that bigger, bring that forward more, make that the focus. And I ended up with something much, much stronger that was much closer to what I wanted, and I'm really happy with that scene now, as opposed to thinking, oh, this is a bad scene. I flipped completely the other way immediately, knowing the emotion was there and focusing on that, as well as one of Shinichi's fun little character quirks that he's a vivid dreamer, which is one thing that was just really, really fun to discover with him. And putting those things together, you get something much better. Again, without that emotion being there in the first draft, yeah, I'd get there eventually, but it would take a lot longer and it would be a lot harder and fall much flatter for much longer. This is why, to me, having these qualities in a first draft really, really matters. Having your immersion, having your internal narration, having your emotion, because this all really, really matters. It's so much easier to edit something that has the things that are really important to a story. I mean, bearing in mind I write character-driven stories and that influences this. But getting all of that in as early as possible makes your job later much easier. And I think a lot of this comes in writing a bit slower, in the sense of I staunchly insist on handwriting my first drafts. Now, I've talked about this many a time on the podcast, but what's relevant to this episode is that if you're writing by hand, the physical process of writing, of forming letters, forming words, is a fraction slower. And it makes you think about exactly what you're putting on the page that little bit more. So you get all of these things much better in a much more raw state, much more easily. The physical act is slower. You can get all these techniques and, speed up how all that works and speed up the actual drafting process. I have an entire episode dedicated to that where I talk about the fact that I play video games while writing, and it is insane that it works. The whole episode about that you can find on my channel. I believe I just called it How to Write Faster. But this idea of immersion, and one of the things that's quite difficult about that is actually getting immersed. How do you do that? And when does it become natural? And I think getting immersed tackles one of the biggest problems that a lot of writers face, especially in first drafts. I mean, you face it at every stage, honestly, but it's, to me, the biggest problem in the first draft: overthinking. And I've been extremely conscious of overthinking while drafting since hypoxemia. I've talked on the podcast many a time about the drafting process for hypoxemia and how I actually just, at the core, didn't enjoy it. And how many things I had to think about that I wouldn't ordinarily think about because of the type of story I was trying to write. How much I overthought that, and how much worse that's made it in some places, and how much of an editing headache I know I'm going to have off the back of that. I'm very conscious of just, if I detect myself overthinking, I go, fuck off, let's get immersed, let's just write the story. And nothing beats immersion for beating the overthinking, because everything becomes more natural. Everything becomes very instinctive, even when you're writing some, and that works in and outside of the determined ones. Is this what part of the reason why my early chapters need more edits? Because it takes time to get immersed in a story for the sake of, when there isn't very much story yet, there isn't very much to get immersed in. And it's that simple. Yeah, almost definitely. I don't know the characters as well, I don't know the story as well, I don't always know what genre it is, I don't know what the heart of the theming is, I don't know how Never Give Up is going to fully manifest in there. I know it's going to be in there, but I don't know exactly what that looks like, because it's not the same across the determined ones, or even if it is going to be in there, if it's, an entirely separate thing with a very loose concept. There are all kinds of sub-threads and subplots that can happen and be foreshadowed on page 1. It happens. But do I know it at that point? Probably not. So yeah, this is going to be a big reason why my early chapters need more edits. But I feel like that's kind of inevitable. That your first chapter always needs the most work, because the first chapter has to just do more. The first chapter opens the story. The first chapter introduces your characters, introduces this and that, but not too much all at once, and it needs to be a punchy, be a good opening, be a strong opening. There's so much more that the first chapter needs to do. It doesn't have anything that's already happened to lean on or add to. It's bringing in cold. But I do think somewhat of a lack of immersion doesn't help. When exactly in a draft does immersion become natural? Depends on the book. Depends on the project. If there's one thing I've learned, that's it. Black Executioner happened incredibly quickly. Mr. Nakagami happened very quickly. Beneath the Moon took forever. Hypoxemia kind of didn't, to be honest, and that's part of the reason why I think that draft is so rough. There are a few places where I felt immersed in it, and a few where I just didn't. Third person drafting for the first time for a full length? Probably. That probably doesn't help, I'm not used to that. But it's not going to happen on chapter 1. It might happen by the end of chapter 1 if your chapter 1's really long. But it takes a while. It's why the start of my drafts, again, are slower to write. I'm always sort of panicking at how slow I'm writing for the first 10-20k, because it is slow. I'm not fully immersed in the same way, especially not for the first 10k. And then, the latter stages are generally just like, oh, okay, another 10k down, another 5k down, awesome, great, this is really, really fast. When I talk about all this immersion though, I mean, how do you begin with all that? To which I say rituals. Rituals matter. You know, pre-writing little rituals help you get immersed, whether that's, having the tea that brings you closer to that project, whether that's playing a few rounds of the game that brings you closer to that project, putting the playlist on, all of these different sorts of things. They all matter. And I think the post-finishing a draft ritual also matters to bring home, this might be a delayed processing thing, but to bring home that you have finished it, that it's done, that you get your sort of closure on the first draft is done. I did the thing. This next project is officially in the books. No matter what that ritual looks like for you, whether that's, just closing the book and putting it on the shelf, putting it under your carpet. Yes, I have actually heard of someone doing that. Or, doing more of what I do, making a little note in a bullet journal, in a log of something, or several logs. I have so many databases, it's actually kind of a problem. But I do think these things matter because it helps you move on to the next project. And maybe this is coming from me having to work on more projects at once than I would like to, because of a bit of second book syndrome, well actually kind of a lot of second book syndrome with Beneath the Moon, and things taking longer because of that, and schedules kind of being messed up because of it. Maybe I feel that more right now than I would ordinarily, but if it helps, it helps. Maybe this is an episode in its own right. Comment down below if that sounds like something you'd like from me. It's something I might do anyway, but hearing you want it is always a boost to that. Of course, you can also tell me on Instagram, since that is the home of the podcast. If you ever want to know what the next episode is, Instagram's the place to be, because at some point I have to decide what it is. I'm Jade_Black21 on there, and if you're liking the unscripted vibe, you'll definitely like the vibe of Instagram, because I have no idea what I'm doing. And there's a lot of indie book hype on there too. And if you want to know what I'm writing and what I'm working on in pretty much real time, since I do writing updates just about every morning, Twitter's the place to be. I'm JBlack21 on there. I also host the monthly Thrills prompts, so come and join in the fun. On Pinterest, I also exist on Pinterest. I'm Jade_Black21 on there. There's a whole bank of snippets from Mr. Nakagami and Black Executioner, a whole load of exclusive art and world building, and some little sneak peeks of what else is coming in the year of thrillers that is this year. If that all sounds cool, Jade_Black21 on Pinterest. I do technically also exist on Blue Sky, but I haven't made time for game dev in a while. I've had too many deadlines, but I'm there if you're so inclined. As of recording this episode, I have 4 published works. So I have 4 published works out there now. The number has gone up. I have 2 full-length novels, Mr. Nakagami and Black Executioner, the first 2 of the determined ones, I and Haru, the iconic duo, political thriller and straight thriller respectively. I also have 2 novelettes, soon to be expanded on. I have Count the Stars, which is a cosy slice of life preview to the determined ones from Isamu's POV, and Charcoal Rain, which is a noir, so thriller sad cousin, that is standalone, that has no relation to anything else. Cozy-ish and Dream Court anthologies respectively, links to all of this in the description. And if you are published, or well on the way, please do get in touch. I would love to be a part of your journey and give you an interview. My email is on screen. A couple of things to note, Indie and Self-Pub, you are the people I want to hear from, and from now on I will be prioritising Indie Dark Lit because there are so few spaces for Indie Dark Lit, and I'm trying to be the change I want to see, is the core of that. And no, for what it's worth, Dark Lit does not include dark fantasy. In terms of being the change I want to see, I do also now have a sister show called Adventures Elsewhere Reviews, where I review ARCs of dark lit books and whatever else I've been reading. There's a whole information episode about that on my channel if you are interested. But until next time, because that's about all from me for now, you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a like, or commenting, or subscribing. It really does help the channel a lot. All music is done by me. Copyright J Black 2025.